he's trying to create a sweet, sincere moment, and yet the viewer knows the undercurrent of what is going on with both of them, and so it ends up being so bittersweet and sad and painful. And then Harry... Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about Requiem for a Dream. The book is by Hubert Selby Jr. and was published in 1978, and I'm comparing it with the movie directed by Darren Aronofsky, which was released in 2000. So this won a book versus movie poll that I had, and I do really want to cover Leaving Las Vegas and Beautiful Boy at some point, but yeah, Requiem for a Dream won by a landslide. And my cat just jumped in my lap to join me for this video, which is probably good to have an emotional support animal when I talk about this one, because this movie has quite the reputation. Anyone who has seen it, 99% of the people who have seen it will say that it is an amazing movie, but one that they never want to watch again. And I have now seen it 3 times, which is 2 times too many. I mean, I'm kind of joking, but the last time I saw it was over 10 years ago. And so I remembered so much of it because once you have seen this movie once, it gets seared in your brain. And so I still remembered most of what happened, and yet I am kind of glad to have watched it again because there's a lot of details I had forgotten and just certain details about the filmmaking within it, like the editing and the music, I had honestly kind of forgotten. I just remembered the plot details. So yeah, as heavy as this movie was, I'm actually glad I rewatched it. Granted, I do not know when I will ever feel the need to watch it for a 4th time, but maybe sometime years and years and years down the road I will. And then the book is also incredibly heavy, but also so fantastic, and the writing style is very unique and it just propels you forward. And it might sound weird to say, but I did not want to put this book down, even though it is dealing with such serious topics. It was so addicting and I just wanted to keep reading. And again, the writing style, it has so many run-on sentences and maybe kind of stream of conscious type scenes as well. And then the dialogue is all just like, there's no paragraph breaks, there's no quotations, it's all just together. It makes such a fast pace and it flows so well. And so again, it just propels you forward and you just feel like you have to keep reading. Also, by the way, the dialogue, the way that it is written, not only are there no line breaks, no quotations, it's also written, I don't know the word for it, but it's written the way the people are pronouncing the words. But yeah, I didn't find this confusing at all. And it made the book all the more immersive, honestly. But the last quarter of the book, I would say, is when it really starts to get emotionally difficult to read. And yet, as I was reading the book, I never cried. And once I finished the book, I also did not cry. It was a few minutes later, I was reading about the author, and suddenly it was like a flip was switched. And as I was reading about him, it wasn't anything crazy, but suddenly just like it all hit me. And no joke, I was crying my eyes out for like 10 minutes straight, which was pretty intense. Maybe also, I mean, there's a lot of craziness going on in the world, so maybe I just have a lot of emotions that needed to get out, and this book is what spurred that to happen. But yeah, I cried so much. And then an hour or 2 after finishing the book is when I watched the movie. And while of course a lot of emotions came up while watching the film, this time around the movie did not make me cry, but I think I had cried myself out earlier after having finished the book. I did, however, make sure to watch some travel shows after the movie because I didn't want us going to bed with the heaviness of this story on our minds, So yeah, I would highly recommend both book and movie. Even if you've seen the movie, I still think you should definitely read the book. But yeah, if you have never experienced either one, just be prepared for how depressing it is. But it's worth watching and reading. And also, I would love to hear from anyone who has experienced a heroin addiction, because there are multiple addictions talked about in this book, but the 2 main ones are heroin and pills. And so I would be curious how someone who has actually struggled with heroin, how they feel about this movie. And yeah, because I feel like you always hear rave reviews, but it's from people who have never actually done heroin. So I'm curious to hear from someone who has actually lived this to some extent. I'm also curious, like, would watching this be a bad idea though? Because would it make someone want to use again, despite it showing how horrible your life can go when you get caught up in this addiction? And yet at the same time, yeah, I wonder if it would trigger people to want to use again. But anyway, yeah, if you yourself have struggled with and are comfortable talking about it, I would love to hear your thoughts on this movie. By the way, I might be censoring that word because I know YouTube can be particular, like demonetizing you if you use a certain word too much. So I might start censoring that word out. So yeah, from here on out, I'm going to get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. And so I'm going to begin going over the characters, and there are 4 main characters here. And Sara, she is someone I'm going to talk about in the second half of this video. This first half, I'm going to talk about the younger 3 characters first. So Harry is the one who connects the Sara storyline with the other storyline because he is the son of Sara. But at the start, we see that he is doing heroin, and over the course of the story, his addiction gets more and more out of control, and the need for a fix takes over his life. And while in the summer, it was easy to get and resell the drugs, as we get into fall and winter, dealers are being killed, and it is harder and harder and more expensive to get some. And they hear that the drugs they are currently getting in the winter, they are coming from dealers in Florida. And so Harry gets the idea to have he and his friend Tyrone drive down to Florida and get drugs right from the source. However, on the way, he has an arm infection from the drug use, and it just gets worse and worse. And he also keeps using his infected arm to shoot up because he is worried that if he tries to find a vein somewhere else, he's worried it won't work and then the drugs will be wasted. And so he doesn't want to waste or lose a high. And so he would rather just keep using this infected arm. The way we see this in the movie was disgusting, and the way it's talked about in the book also was just like so gross. And in the end, his arm gets so bad that he is delirious from the pain, and he ends up in a prison hospital where his arm is amputated and he is left all alone. And then in the book, when he is still not fully awake after this surgery, he has a dream where he sees a light, and from the light, like emanating from that light, is love, and it makes him feel special, and it makes him feel like everything will be okay. And so he is trying to get closer to the light, but no matter how much he walks towards it, how fast he goes, the light always stays the same distance away. Meanwhile, there's this darkness that is overtaking him and getting closer and closer, and then eventually the darkness wins out, and then he wakes up. And so I think it's safe to interpret this dream as the light representing death, and him dying would have been the more comforting, better end for him. But instead, he is overtaken by the darkness, which is waking up to this reality he is in, which is, absolutely horrible and depressing and miserable. Because not only has he lost his arm, he's also all alone, and he is hundreds of miles from home. So this is the dream he has in the book. But in the movie, the dream he has in this final scene is different, and it relates to a vision he had earlier. So earlier on, when he and Tyrone, he and his friend, not only were they doing drugs, they also began selling drugs. And so when Tyrone, before he shows up with the drugs that they are going to cut and sell, Harry, he has a vision of running up to Marion, who is wearing a red dress. But then the arrival of Ty breaks the dream. And then when he is in the hospital, he has this dream once more, but Marion is no longer there. And then he ends up falling off of the pier into the darkness. And so I think Marion represented his dreams for life. She is even wearing red, which happens to be the same color dress that Sara associates with her dreams, which we will get into. But when he first has this vision, he is inside the building, and he sees this vision outside the window, showing that for him to make this dream a reality, he needs to leave the life he is living. But then Ty entering with the drugs breaks the dream, and Harry leaves the fantasy to be with Ty in order to get high and sell drugs. And so because he stays with this line of choice, we get the scene in the end where Marion is no longer there, and he falls into darkness because now that dream he had can never be. And then to move on to Tyrone. So again, he is Harry's friend who is also addicted to heroin, and his addiction also gets out of control. And in the movie, he is also right there when one of the dealers gets shot. But in the book, he had just heard about what happened. He didn't actually witness it. But having him witness it in the movie definitely added another layer to the intensity and just the seriousness of this line of work that he was getting into. And then in both, we also see that he has a girlfriend named Alice, and in the book, she also uses. But during the winter time, when it's hard to get drugs, she ends up leaving, and I think she leaves to go stay with her family or something, and maybe she's trying to get clean. And so then he is left all alone, and his dreams are shattering. And in the movie, we don't hear specifically about Alice leaving, but we get a scene where she is there with him, and then later on, we get a scene of him sitting there alone in his apartment. But on the way down to Florida, which going to Florida is a choice they both soon regret, because as they get closer and closer to Florida, it makes them realize, like, we're getting further and further from home. Once they've gone too far to just quickly turn back, they both start to regret this decision. But when he sees how bad Harry's arm is, he realizes that they need to stop somewhere to get Harry some help. And at this point, they are in the South. And so not only are the locals super racist, but also in part thanks to seeing Harry's arm, they realize that these two guys are drug addicts. And so they call the cops, and Tyrone is sent to work on a chain gang where he is abused by the wardens. And he is sentenced to 3 months for vagrancy, we hear in the book. But honestly, the way he is abused and mistreated by those in charge, I almost got the feeling like it wouldn't be surprising if he was stuck in this prison for even longer. And we see the racism and the way he is treated in the film, but yeah, I feel like it was even worse in the book. And then in the book and movie, we hear about Tyrone's mom, who in the book we learn died when he was pretty young. But we hear how much he loved his mom and how she was always singing and being kind and loving to him. And in the movie, in this vision flashback he has, Ty tells his mom, like, I told you I would make it. And she tells him, you don't have to make anything. You just have to love your mama. And this vision / flashback with his mom happens at a time when he and Harry are making a lot of money dealing. And in the book, he's like appreciating all of the silk shirts he has in this large closet. Whereas in the movie, he's just like loving this huge closet he has. And so he feels like he's made it, right? And yet in the movie, this is when he has that vision of his mom, and it makes him realize for a second before he turns it off, right? But he realizes like what he has achieved financially actually doesn't mean as much as he thought it did, and it's not what truly matters in life. And so it's kind of a sobering moment for him, but again, he kind of quickly like turns it off and tries to forget about that, I think. But then we see him looking at her photo later on, and then we have this vision at the end too. So this is something that comes up a lot with him. But yeah, in the end of the book ends with Tyrone, and he is on his prison cot, and he is in painful withdrawals, and he's thinking about his mom, and then we read, listening to the mom sing and feeling so warm and safe, and he could feel himself drifting to sleep, and all of a sudden his tummy hurt bad, real bad, and he started to cry again. Mommy, mommy, and the moms hold him even tighter as her dress blotted her baby's tears, and Tyrone jerked and twisted involuntarily as he was dragged from his sleep and dreams by his pain and tears. He opened his eyes almost wishing, hoping, but there was only blackness. For a brief second his mind was still aglow with the picture of the moms hugging him and singing. Then the blackness devoured that too, and all he heard were his tears as they wet his cheeks. Which, yeah, just such a heart-wrenching ending. And the movie has this too, where he is laying in his cot and we see he is thinking of his mom. But then the movie cuts to Sarah. And so Sarah's dream is what ends the movie. But yeah, this was the very end of the book here with Tyrone. And yeah, throughout the story, their dreams give them hope and comfort. But here in the end with each of them, their dreams end and they are faced with the painful reality, right? Like with Harry wanting to go to the light, but instead he is overtaken by the darkness and he wakes up to the life that he is now stuck in. And so same with Tyrone, right? Like he wants to hold on to this dream of being with his mom and being comforted, only to then wake up and, you know, like it says, the blackness devoured that too. And all he heard were his tears as they wet his cheeks. Just, oh man. But then we have Marion, who is Harry's girlfriend, also an addict. And she comes from a well-off family, actually. But in the film, we hear at one point that her parents are no longer taking her calls. But I don't recall this being in the book, hearing this detail. And in the book, honestly, she could be a bit more pretentious and came across kind of as the typical rich kid who is rebelling and hates all of the privilege her life comes with. And so she makes a statement by living a grungier life. Not because she has to, but because she wants to. And then in the movie, we get a line where she tells Harry how she doesn't like her parents because all they could give her was money and what she needed was something more, you know, like love and kindness and acceptance. And so in the movie, maybe you could feel for her a bit more, but then also you're just like, are you just some rich kid who takes your wealth and privilege for granted and therefore chooses to squander it? But her life starts to go down the drain when Harry needs money to buy drugs, and he asks her to see her former therapist. So prior to Harry, she used to meet up with this guy and even have sex with him. And since being with Harry, she did go still see him once. But in the book, she makes it clear that she is not going to have sex with a therapist and that the only reason she is seeing him is because her parents give her money each week to pay for therapy. And so she meets up with him to go out to dinner. That way she can tell her parents, like, oh yeah, I'm still seeing my therapist, and they'll give her money. And we hear this has happened with past therapists too, where they stop giving her therapy and instead like begin a relationship with her and start sleeping with her. And so the therapists are like messed up people as well. But anyway, so she had met up with him once prior. However, she did not sleep with him because she was with Harry and they were in love. And so she just went to see him so that her parents would still give her money. But then like 6 months or so have gone by and Harry tells her like, hey, you need to meet up with that therapist and ask him for money. And she tells him, I'm worried about what I'll have to do in order to get the money. So they both know that basically she is going to have sex with him if she wants to get the money from him. And so Harry asking her to do this and her feeling so desperate that she is willing to do it makes her kind of hate herself and Harry in a way for the fact that he asked her to do it. And in the book, as she is with the therapist, before they're about to have sex, she keeps telling herself, like, it's all the same, it's all the same, it's all the same, like trying to convince herself that having sex with him right now is no different than when she had sex with him, 6+ months ago. But lying to herself doesn't work, and she knows that this is a totally different scenario than it was before. And in the movie in particular, I did love the 2 scenes we have with the therapist, because the first time she goes to see him, she is like making fun of him and she feels superior to him. But then the second time around, they both know that the tables have turned and she no longer holds any power because she is now in need of something from him. And then over time, she meets up with a guy named Big Tim, who at this point in the wintertime, is one of the only few people who has drugs, but he will only give it to women in exchange for sex. And so Marion goes to see him, and ultimately seeing Big Tim leads her to be part of this sex thing where she has to do various sex acts with other women while men are around watching. And then she gets drugs in exchange for this. And in the movie, she calls Big Tim after Harry and Tyrone have left. Whereas in the book, Ty actually set up the appointment for her. And then he and Harry, they wait around for her to be done with her appointment. That way, once she's done, they can all get high off of the drugs she is paid with. And while Harry is still in town, she goes to see Tim a number of times, and that is how they continue to get drugs. And also in the book, Big Tim is compared to Santa Claus because of the way he laughs. And this was like such a disturbing and yet effective comparison, because obviously Santa Claus is someone who is so wholesome and jolly and cheerful. And so to have this guy be compared to Santa was just like such a stark contrast that it was disturbing. But also it's interesting because Santa gives gifts to kids who behave well and do the right thing. And so in some ways, Big Tim, he is giving Marion a gift of sorts when she behaves and does the right thing. And so, yeah, it was just an interesting comparison. And so in the very end, after she has gone to this, I guess sex party is the best thing to call it, but seeing that she is willing to do that is already upsetting. But then what really puts the nail in the coffin for you as you're reading about this is when she gets home from this event, we read, it wasn't only what she had done that was disturbing her, but the ease with which she had done it. And when she got her share of the peas, she knew it was all worth it. That taste will last a long time. She smiled to herself, and there's more where that came from, and no one to share it with. I can always have as much as I want. She hugged herself and smiled. I can always feel like this. And the movie does a great job portraying this too, because we see her smiling, holding the drugs as she comes home from this event. And yeah, at this point in both book and movie, Harry and Tyrone are gone, so she doesn't need to share. She can keep it all to herself. And so, yeah, you expect people who have to deprave themselves, right, to feel regret, oh, wow, this is what my life has become. This is horrible. But no, instead, she's just there's more where this came from. I can always feel like this. And so just that too, it's just oh man, it's so hard to read and so hard to watch. But also, I did want to say, this book shows a variety of addictions. And I would say Big Tim, that's an example of sex addiction, right? Along with those other men who were there in the end. And so I feel like often in situations like this, we think of the women who, deprave themselves by doing this. And yet, like, what about the men? Like, they're also so disgusting and so depraved to be paying to see something like this, right? And it's just so disgusting all the way around. And honestly, the men seem more disturbed to me than the women involved in this. But then I wanted to talk about how the drugs make the characters feel and how they get hooked on it because the drugs make them feel whole and special and part of something greater in this world. And that goes for Sara too, right? Who is addicted to her dream of being on TV, which I will get into. But I wanted to share some quotes from the book that talk about how they feel when they are high. The voice so filled with nostalgia that you could almost see the memories floating through the blue smoke. Memories not only of music and joy and youth, but perhaps of dreams. They listened to the music, each hearing it in his own way, feeling relaxed and a part of the music, a part of each other, and almost part of the world. And the warm swelling in the gut as they let the dropper fill up and the blood and booted and then yanked it out and put it in the glass of water and rubbed the drops of blood off their arm and sat back feeling whole and invulnerable and safe and a lot of other things, but mostly whole. And then Harry also makes Marion feel whole and seen and loved. And their love at the start is sweet as they support each other's dreams. And they had also known each other prior to getting involved in drugs. So maybe even without the heroin, maybe they could have had something special. But there's a part in both when he tells her that she is the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. And she tells him how, like, coming from him, it actually means something because he knows her on the inside as well as the out. And in the book, I actually really like what she goes on to say. All my life, I've been told I'm beautiful, a, quote, raven-haired beauty, unquote. And I was told that because that was supposed to make everything all right. Don't worry, honey, you're a beauty. Everything will be all right. My mother's an absolute nut like that. Like, that's the alpha and omega of existence. Like, if you're beautiful, you don't feel pain or have dreams or know the despair of loneliness. Why should you be unhappy? You're so beautiful. My God, they drive me nuts. Like, all I am is a beautiful body and nothing else. Not once, never have they ever tried to love the real me, to love me for what I am, to love me for my mind. And then it's also kind of sad because she's saying how she's been told her whole life, like, oh, all you are is a beautiful face and a beautiful body, and how she hates the way that makes her feel. And yet it is her body in the end that is all she is to those men, right? And that is how she gets her fix, is by just being a body. But Harry and Marion have the dream. So in the book, they want to open up a coffee shop where different artists will hang out. And so as they are selling drugs and getting high, they're focusing on this dream and they're like getting money so that they can one day open this coffee shop. Whereas in the movie, they want to open a clothing shop because Marion likes to design clothes. But yeah, at the start, in both book and movie, they are so excited about this and they'll talk about it and think and plan for it. But as the drugs take over their life, this dream becomes less and less important. And I wanted to share 2 quotes about this dream of theirs. One comes from early on, before the heroin has really taken over their life. And the second one comes from later on in the book. And Marion got up and put the kettle on again and then went back to the couch and cuddled into Harry as they relaxed and listened to the music and discussed the plans for the coffee house as the dope continued to flow through their blood, whispering dreams to every living cell in their bodies. And then later, they looked at Marion's sketches of the coffee house they were going to open, but with diminishing frequency and enthusiasm. Somehow there just didn't seem to be time for it, though they spent a lot of time just lying around and not doing much of anything in particular and making vague plans for the future and enjoying the feeling that everything would always be all right, just like it was now. And then along those lines, I wanted to share this quote about the addiction taking over their lives. We read, "Whatever chances they had, they took automatically as their disease ordered and they obeyed. A small part of them wanted to try to resist, but that part shoved so far down that it was no more than an ancient dream from a previous life." And so the ability, or even the desire to have the ability to resist, that becomes a dream as the story goes on. And also in the movie, so Harry and Marion had taken a picture in front of a space that was for lease. And so they were like, this could be where the coffee shop, or in the movie, it's a clothing shop. They take a picture in front of this space to be like, this is where we'll set it up. And then it is this very photograph that Harry writes Big Tim's phone number on. And so just the symbolism of that, right? This image that represented their dreams, now being used for Big Tim's phone number. And this reminded me of the book, The Glass Castle, because they dig a hole for the foundation of their dream house. But then over time, that dream is abandoned and that hole is used for trash and it becomes a rat infested heap. And so then the symbol of your dreams now represents how far you have sunk, basically. And whenever I talk about addiction, whenever I read books about addiction, the way it progresses, like, it's always just so sad, because when it starts out, the drug encourages your dreams and it gives you so much excitement and it makes you feel good about yourself and your life. But then before long, like a manipulative, abusive relationship, the drug forces itself to become the center of your universe. And that is your sole dream, is just getting more and more. And whatever identity and dreams you once had are forgotten in favor of the drug. And I've mentioned this before too, but there was a woman in an AA meeting that talked about alcohol, and she said it's magic, medicine, misery. Because again, the beginning of it, when you first do it, it's so magical and it makes you feel amazing. And again, it makes you feel like you can achieve your dreams. And then it becomes medicine, because then you get stuck doing it just to feel normal. And then it becomes misery because you feel trapped doing it, even though now you're miserable and you hate your life, and yet you can't see a way out. And in the book and movie, we see how their desperation for drugs deteriorates their relationships. And so in the book in particular, Harry and Tyrone, they had been close friends. I don't know how they met, if they met through Harry or not, but they had been close friends. But then over time, when drugs are harder to find, they start lying to each other about when they've scored, because they don't want to have to share it. And they go so far as, when one of them has had it but don't want to tell the other because they don't want to share it, they will like pretend to start having withdrawal symptoms just to fool the other one. And then we see this with Marion too in the book, because like I said, in the book, she sees Big Tim for a while before Harry leaves. But she lies to him about how much she gets from Big Tim because she wants to keep some for herself. And in the book, we read of this. Now she told Harry she was only getting 6 bags. That was why she was going so often. Harry didn't even bother wondering if he believed her or not. He just took 3 of the bags, not telling Tyrone about it. And whenever he copped, he always held back a few bags on Marion. And when the pangs of conscience started to disturb him, they were readily dissolved by the heroin. And early on, like I said, Harry and Marion, there is something sweet about their relationship, and so it is sad to see it be ruined with distrust. And then in the book, Tyrone, at one point he is put in jail. In both book and movie, he's put in jail. But in the book in particular, there is this older guy who also is arrested, and he has been hooked on heroin for a long, long time. And so he is telling all of these stories. So they are either funny stories or they're like tips on like how to live this life and not die, essentially. And he has all of the other guys in jail all gathered around, and they're all laughing and enraptured by what this old man is saying. And Tyrone is part of it. But then at one point he leans back and he's just like he feels this discomfort and this sickness almost, because he compares the guy to a rat. And he's like, I am not going to become like that old man. Like, yeah, I might be hooked on heroin, but my life will never be like his. And then when Harry bails him out of jail, we read, when the cab stopped, he thanked Harry again and they gave each other 5 and he split. He was still feeling the closeness he felt for Harry when he saw him waiting for him as he stepped through the doorway, a closeness that increased as they shared the cab. It felt warm and good. He wasn't going to be like that old man. He had some good friends, man. He and Harry be tight, Jim, real tight. He thought of how Harry got his ass right down to the jail, but his mind kept going back to the old man too. Every time he tried to keep that good feeling going through him by thinking of how Harry got him out of the slammer, his mind pushed that aside and filled him with a picture of the old man. And yeah, so parts like that in the book too, like the movie really shows how Harry and Marion's relationship is ruined. Even before she goes to Big Tim, or even before she goes to the therapist, they have so much anger between each other because of the lack of when that's around, and they're taking it out on each other. And then of course, when she goes to see the therapist, it just makes things all the worse. But the movie doesn't really show the changes to Harry and Tyrone's relationship, because yeah, in the book, they were close, like that section right there, like how it meant so much to him to have Harry come down right away, and how he felt close to him in the cab. And he felt like, in part because he had good friends, that was going to help prevent him from becoming like that old man in jail. But yeah, so then seeing how over the course of time, how they are lying to each other and their relationship is kind of falling apart was pretty sad. And yeah, the old man isn't in the movie, and I understand why they cut him. But it was interesting to have this physical representation of what their life would be like if they kept going down this path. And they do keep going down this path, and yet all of them are in denial that that is where things are leading. And they always think like, oh, well, I'm different. And then we get this with Marion too, because Big Tim in the book makes a couple comments about how she's hooked on heroin. And she's like taken aback, being like, what? Like, why is he saying that about me? And just the denial, right? Because she's literally there to have sex with a stranger just so she can get heroin, and yet she still doesn't think of herself as a heroin addict. And we get this in the movie too, because in the movie, he invites her to that thing right away, and she tells him like, oh, I'm busy that day. Plus, I'm not actually hooked. And then another line about this in the book I wanted to read. Their disease made it possible for them to believe whatever lies it was necessary for them to believe to continue to pursue and indulge their disease, even to the point of them believing they were not enslaved by it, but were actually free. And again, I recently talked about this with The Shining and how, addiction and The Overlook, it gets you in by making you feel free and telling you like, oh, this is freedom. This is what it is to be alive. But really all it's doing is trapping you. But now it's time to move on to Sara, Harry's mom. So we don't know her age, but she is an older woman whose husband has died and Harry doesn't see her much. At the start, we learn he has repeatedly stolen her TV so he can get drug money, and she has to go buy it back all the time. So that's the extent that she sees Harry. And so, yeah, she's just very lonely, and she has her friends in the building, but that isn't the same as having someone living with her, And she's hooked on TV, and one day she gets a call asking if she would like to be on a TV show, and she enthusiastically says yes. And then she gets a packet a few days later, which she fills out and mails back, and then is anxiously awaiting to hear the details about the show she'll be on. And while waiting, she wants to lose weight so she can fit into an old red dress she has, one which she wore at a significant event in her life when her husband was still alive and Harry was still at home. And so she starts a diet, but she has a hard time resisting the temptation of her fridge. And a friend had told her like, oh, my daughter lost a ton of weight by taking pills that a doctor gave her. And so she ends up asking this woman for the number so that she can go to the doctor and get these pills as well. And so she starts taking these pills, which are basically speed. It was also very similar to Valley of the Dolls, right? I forget the character who's mirrored after Judy Garland. She is taking these diet pills too that ruin her life. But yeah, and over the course of months, Sara's mental and physical health deteriorate because she gets so hooked on these pills, and she ends up in a hospital being wrongfully diagnosed with mental health issues. Like I think in the book they mentioned she has schizophrenia. But all she needed was help getting these pills out of her system and getting her healthy again, right? But instead, they think she has schizophrenia, and so they load her up with even more drugs, and then eventually they are even giving her electroshock therapy, and she is left just being a shell of the woman she once was. And in some ways, I think you could say that Sara is the most tragic figure in this, because Harry, Marion, and Tyrone, they kind of knew what they were getting into, right? When you start doing like, you're walking a fine line. Whereas Sara was naive and she didn't realize what she was fully getting into. But I also did want to mention that her reason for getting hooked on the pills, it's similar though to why the others turned to drugs themselves, because all four of these people want to feel whole. They want to feel loved. They want to feel seen. They want to have something to hold on to and to hope for. And so even though, people like Harry, Marion, and Tyrone, we can see them and be like, oh, they quote unquote did it to themselves. But honestly, I feel like we shouldn't be so judgmental of people who get addicted to a substance, because the reason they turn to it, it's for a very human desire and a very human want and need to feel whole, to feel loved, to feel special. And we all have that. And when they turn to the drugs, at first it does give that to them, right? And so of course they get hooked. But yeah, we all have that need inside of us. And just because you didn't turn to heroin to get that need, it doesn't make you better than the person who did. And so basically, they're fellow humans who just wanted the same thing we all want. But yeah, to get back to Sara. So in the book and movie, her loneliness is just so palpable and painful. And in the book, it also talks about how she just feels so hollow. And we hear how wanting to wear the red dress, it symbolizes so much for her because her husband had loved her in that red dress. And it was a time when she felt loved and needed. And she is excited to be on TV because then she says how the world will see her and the world will love her. But in the meantime, just the idea of being on TV is making her popular and liked just within her social circle of the women who live in her apartment building. And so this goal of losing weight, to be on TV, to fit into this red dress, it makes her feel whole and it fills that hollowness within her. And honestly, you could say that in some ways, this dream of Sarah's to be on TV, the other women in the building, like, they also don't seem to be living the happiest lives. And so I feel like this is filling something within them too, and something exciting happening to Sarah. They all kind of get to live vicariously through her, and it brings all of them more excitement in their life. And yeah, before she's asked to be on TV, we see what her life is like normally. And we also see how TV and food are her current addictions prior to the pills. And in the book, we hear even more about the relationship she has with food and how it's a negative relationship. In the movie, we don't get the stories we hear in the book, but they still do a good job at showing the power food has over her. So again, this is one of those addictions that are shown. And also in the book, all of the women in Sarah's building, they're all hooked on TV. And that's something it talks about, how is even when they're together, they always have like one eye and ear on the TV. And in the movie, all she watches is this infomercial type thing with this self-help guru who is trying to convince people to buy his program that will change their life. But he will also have people come on the show from different areas in the country. So this is what she dreams of being part of. Whereas in the book, she watches game shows as well as soap operas. And she puts so much stock in these shows. And we hear how, because things work out in the TV shows, it gives her hope and makes her believe that her life will work out too, because on TV, things are always okay in the end. So clearly that means my life will be okay too. And honestly, like, this made me reflect on myself because, you know, she puts a lot of stock in these soap operas and TV shows. And I feel like I put a lot of stock in books and movies, right? And I feel like, I don't know, sometimes that makes me feel better about life, is the things I read, right? And so I'm just like, am I like depending too much on movies and books? And yeah, I don't know, certain things, as I'll get into later, it did make me reflect on my own life. But then also when Harry goes to see her and realizes she is on uppers, which is one of the best scenes in both book and movie, he basically tells her that she's silly for caring so much about being on TV. And he's like, you know, it's just TV. Who cares? Big deal. And she goes on to say what has become one of the most iconic monologues in the movie. If you have not seen this movie, you need to, maybe I'll link to it, but you need to watch this scene because it is absolutely incredible. Ellen Burstyn plays Sarah. She was nominated for an Oscar. However, she lost to Julia Roberts and Erin Brockovich. But yeah, Ellen Burstyn is just absolutely incredible. And if you have not watched this, you need to at least watch this scene. But anyway, she goes on to tell him, like, being on TV is a big deal. Like, do you know who has been invited to be on TV? I have. I'm the only one. And she says how it makes her popular and liked and special, and how much this means to her. And she goes on to say, again, one of the most iconic lines, and I want to read it. This is the line that comes from the book, but again, it's right in the movie. She says, "It's like a reason to get up in the morning. It's a reason to lose weight so I can be healthy. It's a reason to fit into the red dress. It's a reason to smile already. It makes tomorrow all right." Sarah leaned a little closer to her son. "What have I got, Harry? Why should I even make the bed or wash the dishes? I do them, but why should I? I'm alone." "No, Harry, I like how I feel this way. I like thinking about the red dress and the television, and your father and you. Now, when I get the sun, I smile." And as their visit comes to an end, she tells him, because he has also been telling her, like, "Oh, my life's doing great. I got my own business," when really his business is dealing drugs. But anyway, she says to him, "I'm glad. Your father and I were always wanting only the very best for you. I see on the television how it's always all right in the end." And so that line about the television wasn't in the movie, but again, referencing how, because in the TV shows it always ends all right, she clings to that, wanting to believe that that means her life will be all right, no matter how depressing it is right now. No matter if her son is stealing her TV, like, she wants to believe that it'll still be all right. But also when she talks about what being on TV and what losing weight in the red dress, what it all means to her, and how it gives her a reason to wake up in the morning and it makes tomorrow okay. I feel like that too is pretty relatable because as adults, especially, I think we all create things in our lives to make our lives feel like they're worth living. Like we want to have something to give us motivation to wake up in the morning, you know? And so, yeah, like honestly, books and movies, working on why the book wins, sometimes this is what makes getting up in the morning worthwhile because I love doing this and it fills me with so much excitement. But then saying that almost feels kind of sad. Like, I don't know, like working on this YouTube channel is what makes, I mean, it's not solely what makes life worth living, right? I have other things going on in my life. But yeah, so it just makes me think like, what have I created? What have I turned into something so special? Because I feel like it makes life worth living in some sense, right? It makes tomorrow okay. It gives me something to look forward to and something to work on. And yeah, I don't know, like I have other things that give me motivation to wake up in the morning. I also love running and, you know, having a race planned that I am preparing for. But even that, it's like running, that's my reason for waking up in the morning. Like, this didn't make me depressed about my own life because again, like I said, I have family and everything. But yeah, I think all of us, especially as adults, we do have things that to others might seem silly. And yet for us, it's what we're holding on to make life worth living. And for Sarah, it's the dream of being on TV and fitting into the red dress. But yeah, so at first when she is on the pills, they make her feel great. However, over time, she starts just kind of taking them willy-nilly and she starts hallucinating and hearing things. And another heartbreaking scene in the book, which is also in the movie, is when she envisions herself on TV looking amazing. And then her TV self comes out of the TV along with the host. And then they ridicule her apartment and she is weakly trying to defend why she doesn't have something nicer and fancier. And again, this is in the movie and it came straight from the book, but it was just so heartbreaking. And also the stuff with the fridge and what she, you know, hallucinates with the fridge also comes right from the book. And as time goes on, in the book, her friends see that she is not looking well. And so in the book, her friends have her go to the doctor. However, as we see in the movie, the doctor does not see her as a human being. And even when she goes and is looking all strung out, he does not care. And he just gives her more pills. And that's also why her story is so sad and angering because she went to a professional when she knew something was wrong, and yet they were not there to help her. And they just didn't see her as an individual who needed help. But in the movie, she just goes on her own accord. But I did like in the book that her friends do care about her, right? And they notice she isn't doing well. And so they convince her to go back to the doctor, even though it's all to no avail. And then another heartbreaking scene in both book and movie is when she is really far gone and she goes to the studio where she thinks she will be on TV, and they call the cops to come take her away because obviously she's not well. And in both book and movie, the cops ask her if she can walk and she says, "I can walk across the stage." And then she goes on about being on TV. And again, this is right out of the book, but seeing Ellen Burstyn, her portrayal of this, she's just so incredible, and it was just so devastating. And yeah, in both book and movie, she is mistreated by the medical staff and she ends up getting shock treatment. But in the book, we read before she gets shock treatment, one of the doctors who sees her is like, she doesn't have schizophrenia. She's just hopped up on these pills. Like, we just need to clean her system out and just get her eating healthy again. And so he talks to a higher up doctor and he tells him this, like, hey, this other doctor made the wrong call. Like, she doesn't need to be in the mental health ward. But the higher up doctor tells him, like, this is how we run things here. We have way too many patients as it is, and we're dealing with things as we see fit. And if you have a problem with that, you can quit. And so the movie, we see how the medical staff mistreats patients, but the book really highlights this all the more because, yeah, this guy who was there advocating for her is just shut down and they don't care. And in both, her friends come see her at the end when she is a wreck and her hair is chopped off. And when they leave, they cry and hug each other, which again was just another devastating scene. And her hair, by the way, Sarah's hair has such a transformation through the course of this movie in particular. At the start, it's normal looking, and then it becomes orange as she is trying to dye it red. Then it gets to be red. However, then it is red, but the roots are growing out with hair that hasn't been washed or brushed for what looks like weeks. And then by the end, it's just all chopped off. But then I wanted to talk about Sara and Harry's relationship more specifically, because her dreams, what she holds on to, it also involves Harry, right? Because she's always saying like, oh, he's such a good boy and I just want him to be happy and successful. And she wants to believe that he will amount to something, despite the fact that, again, at the start, people see he is a druggie who keeps stealing her TV, and he complains that she manipulates him with guilt trips, but he is also manipulating her. But then when they are successful dealing drugs and are making a lot of money, Harry, he does love his mom. And so he's like, I want to do something for her. And she loves TV, so I want to buy her a new TV. And he is talking to Marion about his relationship to his mom, and he says, I don't know. It's not that I want to attack her so much. It's just that I see her sitting there in that same old apartment that she's been in forever, wearing the same old house dress. You know, even if it isn't the same, it is. And I don't know what to do. When I'm away from her, it's fine. Like, I love her and have nice thoughts about her when I think about her. But when I'm there in that apartment with her, something happens and I get so goddamn irritated that I end up yelling at her. But then, yeah, he goes to see her to tell her that he bought her a new TV. And also he apologizes to her, being like, I know what I've put you through and I'm sorry. And so it's like almost a sweet moment, but he took her before he saw her, so he's on drugs. She is, all hopped up on pills. And so he's trying to create a sweet, sincere moment, and yet the viewer knows the undercurrent of what is going on with both of them. And so it ends up being so bittersweet and sad and painful. And then Harry, he notices that she's grinding her teeth, and that's when he's like, are you on uppers right now? And so what he had meant to be a sweet moment turns into him finding out that his mom is on drugs, and finding out, this is when she tells him just how lonely she is and how her life has no meaning. And so it ends up being, again, just a heartbreaking scene. And in the movie, I loved this because Harry leaves from seeing her and we see him crying in the back of the cab, but then he either does drugs or maybe just the thought of getting a fix. Suddenly we see that he's not crying anymore, and instead he's just emotionless. And so we see how he turns to drugs in order to numb the painful emotions he has, right? But I have also talked about this before too, how you can't be selective with what emotions you numb, right? When you try to numb the negative emotions, you therefore are going to numb the positive ones too, because you can't be selective, especially when it comes to drugs and alcohol. Like, everything is numbed. You can't just choose to numb the bad stuff only. And at the very end of the movie, like I said, we end with Sara and her fantasy, and she is in the hospital, and we see her thinking about being on the TV show. And this time Harry comes out and joins her, and they hug and they tell each other they love each other. And then the movie ends. And again, she just wanted to feel loved and wanted her son to be proud of her and for her son to be happy and successful. And that is really her biggest dream. And while it is sweet to want a good life for the people you love, there is a negative side to this too, because holding on to a dream of what you want someone to be, it means that you are not accepting them for who they are and for who they want to be. And maybe you're even denial, not wanting to see who they truly are. And so if your dream of what you want their life to be is making your life just harder, then one, stop calling it a dream, because that's a euphemism. It's a dream makes it seem like it's something so much more special, when it's like, no, you just want. It's not like she's wanting to control Harry, but she's not accepting who he is and wanting something different for him than what his life truly is, right? Like, again, I keep coming back to the fact that he steals her TV, which she had chained to a radiator because this has happened before. So she had locked it up to try to prevent him from stealing it. But of course, this does nothing to stop him. And when she goes to buy it back, we see the pawn owner, he has been documenting how much Harry was paid for the TV versus how much Sara has paid to get it back and how much she still owes him from all of these times it has happened. The pawn shop owner, he's like, we could call the cops, they could do something. And she's like, oh, no, like, he's a good boy, he's gonna be okay, blah, blah, blah. Like, she is just not seeing the reality of the life he is choosing to live. And even though, her dream of what she wants for him is better than the life he's choosing, and yet at the end of the day, it's his life and this is what he's choosing, and you holding on to this dream is just making you more miserable. And so I think we all get stuck doing this, where we have someone we love who's maybe not making good choices, what we think aren't good choices, and we have a dream of what we wish they would do, but that's not helping anybody. It's better to just see the reality of who they are and what they want to be, and to just find a way to accept it. But just some final thoughts I have. I know this has been a longer video, but I wanted to mention that the book does have some funny moments, and the movie does too, to some extent, but in general, they're both so heavy. But a funny moment in the book is when she is reading her diet book, because she starts out being on a very restrictive diet. And when she is reading how few things you can eat, we read, Sara continued to stare and chew. She looked very carefully between the lines, having heard that that was where the real information was. So I thought that was funny. But then there's another funny part when Harry and Marion are walking home late at night and they see two drunk people walking home. And the drunk woman, has to pee. And so she just squats down and starts peeing right there in the sidewalk. And then the guy she is with ends up falling into where she is going to the bathroom. And then we read, and also it says how the woman is peeing so much. And then we read, and to add volume and speed to the river's flow as her defender and companion of the evening splattered and splashed, I can't swim, I can't swim. And finally, through grim determination and pure grit, reached shallow ground and pulled himself ashore and knelt, with his head hanging, catching his breath, as his lady of the evening rolled over with another long sigh and curled up in a fetal position and went to sleep in the sheltering bushes of the river's headwaters. Harry was chuckling and shaking his head. Juice heads are too much, aren't they? They really have no class at all. But yeah, how it's acting like she's going so much that he's being like, I can't swim. And then saying how she got shelter from the river's headwaters. Like, it's so gross, but so funny. Also, by the way, not funny, but it says how she curled up in the fetal position. And that reminded me that in the movie, each of the four characters, the last scene we get of them, all of them turn and are curled up in the fetal position in the end. And there is also a scene that is unique to the movie when Harry calls Marion while he is in jail. And he's telling her like, oh, I'll be home soon. And she says, Harry, can you come home right now? And he says, yeah, I'll come home right now. But they both know this is a lie, of course. And this was such a fantastic scene. And one, again, it was not in the book, but it is just so painful because they are both looking to other people to save them in a sense. And yet neither is able to save themselves or save the other person. And so he calls her the night she's getting ready to go to that event. And so after this phone call, she just continues getting ready and goes over there. Like she doesn't want to go, and yet she doesn't have it in her to stop herself. Like she needs someone else there to convince her to stay, you know? And also I wanted to mention that the author, Hubert Selby Jr., he himself was addicted to a variety of drugs at different points in his life, including heroin, but eventually he did get clean and sober. And so I feel like because he has had this experience, like this story, what he writes about, I'm sure a lot of it comes from personal experience, as well as things he witnessed or heard about from being in these social circles. But when it comes to book versus movie, this is one, again, where it just feels impossible to choose a winner because so much of what makes the movie great, like they take so much from the book, right? So much of the movie, it has the book to thank, you know, the characters, the dialogue, the events. And then the book is also, again, just so well written and written in a really unique style that just works so well. But then the movie just has incredible editing, fantastic performances, and an amazing score. Like it's just, technically it's so well done, but then also just emotionally and the performances, it's just like, it's a masterpiece, honestly, in my mind. But so is the book in its own way. And again, in the past, the movie left me so gutted, whereas here, after I finished the book, like, I cried for 10 minutes straight, so clearly it had an impact on me. But I think ultimately, I will say the movie wins because it really is just so incredible. And I love the split frames we get to at different times. And it's just an incredible adaptation of this book. Like it took something so amazing and just brought it to life and elevated it in a sense. So I'll say the movie wins, but I highly, highly, highly recommend the book. If you love the movie, please read the book. It is so worth it. There are a few changes, some of which I touched on, some of which I didn't. But even though the majority of the plot does stay the same, yeah, the book is still something that is worth experiencing for yourself. So yeah, anyway, that wraps it up for Requiem for a Dream. This was a heavy one. Let me know your thoughts down below if you have read or watched this and what you think. If you have never read or watched it, but watched all of this video, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts just based on how I have described them. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.